Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I want to speak to you about something profound, something that stirs the heart and uplifts the spirit, why God wants to be alone. Sometimes God's solitude carries lessons for us, and today we'll explore how this can transform our own lives. Let me tell you something powerful about the concept of solitude. You see, there's a holiness to being alone, a sacredness that resonates deeply with the heart of creation itself. When we think about God, it's easy to imagine him as always surrounded by the hosts of heaven, by angels singing, by the constant flow of prayers from his people. And yet the Bible shows us moments where God withdraws, where he chooses to be alone. These moments aren't random or accidental. They carry a profound message for us. Solitude is not just an absence of company. It is the presence of something greater. It's a space where divine clarity is born. When God chooses to be alone, it's not because he needs a break or because he's overwhelmed. No, God is never weary. He is never in need the way we are. His solitude is a sacred act, a deliberate choice that teaches us something about how to live our own lives. In the very beginning, before the universe was spoken into existence, God was alone. He didn't create the world out of loneliness. He created it out of fullness, out of the abundance of his own heart. This tells us something powerful. Solitude is not emptiness. It is not about lack. It is about wholeness. It is about a space so full of purpose and potential that creation itself springs forth from it. Now think about this. Why does God call us to times of quiet, to moments where we step away from the busyness of life? It's because those are the moments when we can truly hear him, when we can feel his presence in a way that gets lost in the noise of the world. Sometimes we resist solitude because we're afraid of being alone. We fill our days with activity, with people, with distractions, thinking that the more we do, the more meaningful our lives will be. But God shows us a different way. His moments of solitude are not about doing, they're about being still, being reflective, being connected to the essence of who he is and what he has planned. When God was alone before the creation of the world, it wasn't a time of inactivity. It was a time of preparation. He was preparing the heavens, the earth, the stars, the galaxies. He was preparing the intricate balance of nature, the beauty of a sunrise, the rhythm of the ocean waves. Every detail was crafted in those moments of divine solitude. And what that shows us is this: great things are born out of quiet places. The most profound works, the most meaningful breakthroughs don't happen in the rush and the crowd, they happen in the stillness. We live in a world that celebrates hustle and noise. We are told that success looks like being constantly on the go, constantly achieving, constantly surrounded by people. But God's example reminds us that the most sacred work often begins in solitude. It's in the quiet moments that vision takes shape. It's in the stillness that we find clarity. It's in the absence of distraction that we hear the voice of purpose speaking to our hearts. Sometimes solitude feels uncomfortable because it forces us to confront ourselves. When we're alone, there's no one to impress, no one to distract us from our thoughts. But those moments are where transformation begins. It's in solitude that we face our fears, our doubts, our dreams, and our deepest longings. And in facing those things, we open ourselves to God's work in our lives. When we resist solitude, we resist the opportunity for God to shape us in the way that only he can. The sacredness of solitude isn't just about preparation, it's also about restoration. Even God rested on the seventh day, and that rest was a form of holy solitude. It was a time to reflect, to look at what had been created and declare it good. In the same way, we need moments to pause, to step back from the rush and acknowledge the goodness of what God has done in our lives. Those are the moments when gratitude takes root, when we see the beauty that we often overlook in our busy days. Let me encourage you to embrace the sacredness of solitude. It's not about isolating yourself. It's about finding the space where you can truly connect with God, where you can hear his voice and feel his guidance. Solitude is not a place of emptiness. It's a place of fullness, a place where divine clarity can shine through. Think about the moments in life when something truly significant was about to happen. Often, those moments didn't start in the middle of a crowd or with fanfare. They began quietly behind the scenes, in places where no one was watching. That's the power of preparation and privacy, a truth that even God demonstrated from the very beginning. Before the universe came into existence, before the heavens and the earth were formed, God existed in a state of profound solitude. It wasn't a loneliness. It was a deliberate, purposeful time of preparation. And through this, he gave us a pattern to follow in our own lives. When God prepared the world, it wasn't rushed. He didn't haphazardly throw the stars into the sky or scatter the seas upon the earth without intention. Everything was meticulously planned and perfectly timed. The sun was set to rise and fall in harmony with the moon. The seasons were orchestrated with precision. Every detail of creation was thoughtfully designed, and all of it began in the quiet of God's divine privacy. This teaches us that meaningful preparation doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in those unseen moments where focus and intention can take root. How often do we try to skip over preparation because we're eager for the results? We want the success without the solitude, the reward without the process. But God shows us that the process is where the power lies. Before the earth could sustain life, it had to be prepared. The waters had to be separated, the land had to appear, and the environment had to be ready. There was a sequence, a rhythm to creation, and it all started with careful planning in a space that was free from distraction. Sometimes preparation requires us to step away from the noise and activity of the world. It's in those moments of privacy that we can focus on the foundation of what we're building. Think about a house being constructed. The foundation isn't laid in the middle of a bustling street or while the homeowners are throwing a party. It's laid in a quiet, intentional manner, away from the distractions of everyday life. Without that solid foundation, the house wouldn't stand. In the same way, our dreams, our goals, and even our faith need time to be built in the privacy of preparation. God's example reminds us that the best things often take time to develop. There's a reason the earth wasn't created in a single moment. Instead, it unfolded over days, with each step building upon the last. This shows us that preparation is a process, not a one-time event. It's about layering each piece carefully, ensuring that everything aligns with the greater purpose. When we rush through preparation, we risk missing the details that can make all the difference. But when we embrace it, we allow God to work through us, crafting something far greater than we could achieve on our own. It's also important to remember that preparation in privacy isn't just about the outcome, it's about transformation. In those moments of solitude, God shapes us. He molds our character, strengthens our resolve, and clarifies our vision. Just as He prepared the earth to sustain life, He prepares us to step into the fullness of our purpose. But that preparation requires us to be still, to listen, and to trust that the process is necessary. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to step back and wait. We want to move forward to see progress immediately. But God's timing is always perfect, and His process is always worth it. Consider the story of Jesus before He began His ministry. He didn't start by gathering crowds or performing miracles. Instead, He spent time alone in the wilderness, fasting, praying, and preparing. That period of solitude wasn't wasted, it was essential. It fortified Him for the challenges ahead and connected Him deeply with His Father. In the same way, our times of preparation may not always feel exciting, but they are crucial for what lies ahead. In our lives, we often face moments where it feels like nothing is happening. We might wonder why our prayers aren't being answered or why our dreams seem to be on hold. But those are the times when God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for something greater. He's building our strength, refining our character, and equipping us with everything we need for the journey ahead. Just as He prepared the earth to be a place of beauty and abundance, He is preparing us to step into the plans He has for our lives. Preparation in privacy is also a reminder of the importance of focus. When we're in the middle of the noise and activity of life, it's easy to get distracted. But in solitude, we can zero in on what truly matters. We can hear God's voice more clearly, understand His purpose more deeply, and align our hearts with His will. It's in those moments that we gain the clarity and strength to move forward with confidence. One of the most beautiful and profound aspects of God's character is how He seeks the heart over the crowd. He isn't moved by numbers or impressed by sheer volume. He is drawn to the individual, to the unique and intimate connection that can only be found in one-on-one moments. When we consider why God wants to be alone, it's not because He needs separation from us, but because He desires the kind of intimacy that can only happen when distractions fade and the heart comes into focus. This is a pattern we see time and again throughout the scriptures and in the way God interacts with His people. Think about the story of Adam in the Garden of Eden. Before Eve was created, Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. It was just the two of them sharing a bond that was direct, personal, and unfiltered. God could have chosen to create Adam and Eve at the same time, to place them both in the garden and begin their journey together. But He didn't. He started with Adam alone, establishing a foundation of relationship, teaching us that connection with God begins on an individual level. It's not about being part of a group or blending into the crowd. It's about the unique relationship each of us has with our Creator. This truth is also reflected in the way Jesus lived and ministered during His time on earth. While He often spoke to large crowds and performed miracles in front of many, His most profound moments were with individuals. He met Nicodemus in the quiet of the night, away from the gaze of others, to share the truths of the kingdom of God. He sat at the well with the Samaritan woman, speaking to her heart and revealing a deeper understanding of her worth and His purpose. He called Zacchaeus down from the tree and went to his home, choosing to spend time with one man rather than the masses that followed Him. Time and again, we see that Jesus prioritized the heart over the crowd, showing us the value of personal connection. In a world that often celebrates visibility and recognition, God's approach is a powerful reminder of what truly matters. It's easy to feel lost in the crowd, to think that our individual lives might not matter in the grand scheme of things. But God shows us that every heart is seen, every story is known, and every life is cherished. He doesn't just see humanity as a collective, he sees each of us as individuals with unique struggles, dreams, and potential. And because of this, he often seeks us in moments of quiet, away from the noise and the distractions, so he can speak directly to our hearts. This emphasis on the individual is a reminder that we too are called to prioritize personal connections. It's tempting to measure success by how many people we can reach or how much attention we can draw. But the greatest impact often happens in the smallest moments, in the one-on-one conversations where hearts are open and transformation begins. When we take the time to focus on individuals, to listen to their stories and speak to their needs, we are following the example of God himself. He shows us that it's not about the quantity of connections, but the quality of them. God's desire to connect with us individually also speaks to the way he communicates. While he can certainly move in grand and dramatic ways, his voice is often heard most clearly in the stillness. Elijah learned this lesson when he sought God on Mount Horeb. The Lord wasn't in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He was in the gentle whisper. That whisper is a testament to God's desire for intimacy, for a kind of closeness that requires us to quiet our surroundings and focus entirely on him. It's in those moments of solitude that we come to understand just how deeply we are known and loved. This focus on the individual also challenges us to examine how we approach our relationship with God. Do we seek him only in the big moments, in the gatherings, and the events, or do we make time to be alone with him, to hear his voice and feel his presence in the quiet places? God's example shows us that the depth of our relationship with him isn't determined by how often we're part of the crowd, but by how willing we are to step away and be alone with him. Those private moments where it's just us and God are where true connection happens. When God seeks the heart over the crowd, he also reminds us of the value he places on authenticity. In the crowd, it's easy to put on a mask, to present ourselves in a way that fits expectations. But in solitude with God, there's no room for pretenses. He sees us as we are, and he loves us fully. That kind of love, so personal and unconditional, is transformative. It's the kind of love that heals wounds, restores hope, and gives us the courage to step into our purpose. Let's take a moment to reflect on the divine example of rest. When God created the heavens and the earth, he took 6 days to form the universe in all its beauty and intricacy. But on the seventh day, something remarkable happened. God rested. This wasn't because he was tired or needed to recharge. After all, God is omnipotent, limitless in his energy and strength. No, this rest was intentional, deliberate, and deeply meaningful. It was a declaration that rest itself is not only important, but sacred. It was God setting an example for us, showing us that rest is not a sign of weakness, but a divine rhythm meant to restore and renew us. Rest in its purest form is a moment of pause, a time to step back and reflect on what has been done. When God rested on the seventh day, he looked at everything he had created and declared it good. There's a powerful lesson in this for us. How often do we rush from one task to the next without taking a moment to appreciate what we've accomplished, to see the goodness in the work of our hands or the blessings in our lives? God's act of resting teaches us that it's not just about working hard, it's also about valuing the fruits of that labor and taking the time to acknowledge the beauty and purpose in it. In our fast-paced world, rest is often seen as a luxury or even a weakness. We live in a culture that glorifies busyness, where the measure of success is often tied to how packed our schedules are or how many tasks we can juggle at once. But God's example reminds us that rest is not an afterthought or something to be squeezed in when there's nothing else to do. Rest is an essential part of the rhythm of life, a divine principle that allows us to recharge, refocus, and reconnect with what truly matters. When God rested, it wasn't just about ceasing from work, it was about creating space. Space to reflect, space to celebrate, and space to simply be. This is a reminder to us that rest isn't just about stopping activity, it's about making room for what restores our souls. It's about finding the moments where we can breathe deeply, connect with God, and realign ourselves with his purpose. In those moments of rest, we find clarity, strength, and the peace that often eludes us in the chaos of everyday life. The sacredness of rest also points to the importance of trust. When we pause to rest, we're making a statement of faith. We're saying that we trust God enough to step back, to let go of our striving, and to believe that he is in control. It's an act of surrender, a way of acknowledging that our worth is not defined by our productivity, but by who we are in him. When God rested on the seventh day, he didn't stop being God. He didn't lose control of the universe. Instead, he showed us that rest is not about abandoning responsibility, but about embracing balance and trust. Rest also brings renewal. Just as God's rest set the stage for everything that would follow, our moments of rest prepare us for what's ahead. When we rest, we allow our minds, bodies, spirits to be refreshed. We gain the strength and perspective needed to face new challenges and opportunities. Without rest, we risk burnout, frustration, and a sense of emptiness that no amount of busyness can fill. God's example shows us that rest is not only restorative, but also transformative. It gives us the energy and vision to step into the next season of our lives with purpose and clarity. There's another aspect of God's rest that is profoundly personal. When he rested, he didn't do it alone. His rest was a moment of communion within the Trinity, a reflection of the relational nature of God himself. This reminds us that rest is not always about isolation. It can also be about connection. It's about spending time with those we love, nurturing relationships, and finding joy in shared moments of peace and stillness. Rest allows us to strengthen the bonds that matter most, both with God and with others. God's example of rest calls us to embrace a spirit of gratitude. When he paused on the seventh day, he didn't just reflect on what he had done. He celebrated it. He delighted in his creation and declared it good. Rest gives us the opportunity to do the same, to look at our lives through the lens of gratitude and recognize the blessings that surround us. It's in those moments of rest that we can truly see the hand of God at work, weaving beauty and purpose into every part of our journey. There's a profound truth about how God communicates with us that can change the way we approach our lives. Sometimes God is quiet, and it's not because he's absent or distant. It's because he wants us to listen in the silence. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is often where the deepest, most intimate conversations take place. In a world filled with noise and distractions, God's silence is an invitation to lean in closer, to quiet our own hearts and minds so that we can truly hear him. It's in those silent moments that his voice often speaks the loudest, not through thunderous declarations, but through whispers that reach the depths of our souls. Think about how Elijah encountered God on Mount Horeb. Elijah was expecting God to show up in dramatic ways in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. But God wasn't in any of those. Instead, he came in a gentle whisper, a still small voice that could only be heard in the silence. That moment teaches us that God doesn't always communicate with grand gestures or visible signs. Sometimes he chooses the quietest means to speak the most profound truths. And why is that? Because whispers require us to stop, to pay attention, and to focus entirely on him. In our lives, it's easy to equate silence with absence. When we don't hear from God in the way we expect, we might start to feel forgotten or overlooked. But God's silence is never about abandonment. It's about intimacy. When he is silent, it's often because he wants to draw us closer, to create a space where we are fully present with him. In that silence, he is teaching us to trust, to seek, and to wait with expectation. Silence can feel uncomfortable at times, but it's in that discomfort that we often grow the most. It forces us to set aside our agendas, to pause our endless striving, and to simply be in his presence. Silence is also a space for reflection. When God is quiet, it gives us the opportunity to listen not just to him, but to the condition of our own hearts. In the stillness, we can examine our thoughts, our motives, and our desires. We can bring them before God, allowing him to reveal what needs to change and what needs to grow. It's in these moments of introspection that we often find clarity and direction. The silence becomes a mirror reflecting not only who we are, but also who we are becoming him. There's another reason why God speaks in the silence. It teaches us patience. We live in a culture that thrives on instant gratification, where waiting feels like a waste of time. But God operates on a different timeline, one that is perfect and purposeful. When he is silent, it's not because he isn't working, it's because he is teaching us to trust in his timing. Silence reminds us that we are not in control, that our plans and schedules must ultimately yield to his greater plan. Patience isn't just about waiting. It's about waiting with faith, knowing that God's silence is never empty but filled with his purpose. God's silence so strengthens our faith. When we can't hear him, we're challenged to hold on to what we know about his character. We're reminded of his promises, his faithfulness, and his love. Silence becomes a test of trust. Do we believe that God is still good, even when we can't hear his voice? Do we trust that he is still at work, even when we don't see immediate results? In those moments of silence, our faith is refined, becoming stronger and deeper than it was before. Silence can also be a sign that God is preparing us for something greater. Just as a seed grows beneath the surface before it bursts into the light, God often works behind the scenes in ways we cannot see. His silence is not inactivity, it's preparation. It's in those quiet times that he shapes our hearts, equips us for the challenges ahead, and aligns us with his will. The silence is not a void, it's a womb, a place where new life is being formed. Finally, God's silence creates space for us to respond. When we're constantly surrounded by noise, it's easy to become passive listeners, waiting for God to do all the talking. But in the silence, we are invited to participate in the conversation. We are given the opportunity to pray, to seek, and to worship. Silence is not the absence of God's voice, it's an opening for our voices to rise to Him. It's a reminder that our relationship with Him is not one-sided, but dynamic and interactive. There is something profoundly significant about the way God operates in solitude, not out of isolation. With a purpose, reveals His sovereignty and intention. When God chooses to be alone, He has shown us the importance of deliberate separation, of stepping away from the distractions of the world to focus on what truly matters. It is not a withdrawal from relationship, but an example of how creation itself was birthed from divine moments of concentrated intention. God's time alone demonstrates His infinite capacity to work with purpose, to act with clarity, and to teach us the power of focus. From the very beginning, the Bible shows us that God's solitary moments were not idle or accidental. When He hovered over the waters before creation, there was no audience, no participation from anyone else. It was just God in the vastness of nothingness, and yet out of that quiet, intentional solitude came everything we know, the heavens, the earth, and all life within them. This reminds us that some of the most extraordinary outcomes are born in moments of separation, where the noise of the world is silenced, and the focus is entirely on creation and purpose. When God works alone, He is not constrained by outside opinions or limited by external expectations. He operates in a realm of pure sovereignty, where His will is accomplished without interference. This is a powerful lesson for us as we navigate our lives. How often are we distracted by the opinions of others, swayed by the noise of the world, or bogged down by external pressures? God's example of working in solitude teaches us the value of stepping away from these influences to find clarity and purpose. It is in these moments of separation that we can align ourselves with His will and discover the path He has set before us. Solitude with purpose is not about isolation, but about intentional focus. When God chooses to be alone, it is always with the intent of creating, restoring, or preparing. This teaches us that stepping away from the chaos is not about running from responsibility, but about equipping ourselves for what lies ahead. Consider Jesus, who often withdrew to solitary places to pray. He wasn't avoiding His mission, He was preparing for it. Those moments of quiet communion with His Father strengthened Him, guided Him, and filled Him with the resolve to carry out His purpose. God's example also shows us that solitude is a time for reflection and planning. Before He spoke light into existence, before He separated the waters or formed the land, there was a moment of contemplation. He didn't rush into creation, He planned it with precision and purpose. This reminds us that our greatest achievements often come not from hurried action, but from deliberate preparation. When we take the time to pause, reflect, and seek God's guidance, we position ourselves to act with intention and clarity. Solitude is also a time for rest and restoration. When God rested on the seventh day, He wasn't just ceasing from activity, He was demonstrating the importance of stepping back to appreciate what had been accomplished. Rest is not a sign of weakness, but a necessary part of the rhythm of life. It allows us to recharge, to reflect, and to celebrate the work of our hands. In a world that often glorifies constant activity, God's example teaches us that rest is a sacred act, a moment to connect with Him and realign our hearts with His purpose. There is also a profound sense of trust in God's solitude. When He works alone, He is not seeking validation or approval. He knows the outcome of His actions and trusts in His own sovereignty. This is a lesson for us as we face challenges and decisions in our lives. How often do we seek reassurance from others or second-guess our choices because of fear or doubt? God's example teaches us to trust in the process, to have faith in His guidance, and to move forward with confidence even when the path is not yet clear. Finally, God's solitude is a reminder of His relational nature. Even when He works alone, His intention is always to connect, to create a world where we can experience His love, His grace, and His presence. His solitary moments are not about separation from us, but preparation for us. Every act of creation, every moment of reflection, and every instance of rest is done with us in mind. It is a powerful reminder that even in His solitude, God is never distant or danger engaged. He is always working for our good, always preparing a way for us to walk in His purpose and His grace. As we reflect on the profound truths shared today, we see that God's desire for moments of solitude is not about separation, but preparation, not about absence, but intimacy. In His stillness, He works with intention, demonstrates trust, and invites us to draw closer. His quiet moments teach us the value of rest, the power of focus, and the beauty of personal connection. Through His example, we are reminded that even in silence, He is present, and even in solitude, His love for us remains steadfast. Let us embrace these lessons, finding strength, clarity, and renewal in our own quiet moments with Him.